Gina, who was, a career advisor, was telling us to make sure after we graduated, don't do any travel. So I did exactly the opposite and left the day after we graduated.
Hello, everyone. My name is Legal, and welcome to Educative Sessions, a podcast series with people in the developer world about their coding experiences. This is powered by Educative, which makes it easy for authors to provide interactive and adaptive courses for software developers. And today, my guest is Rachelle Rathbone, who is a software engineer with Atlassian. And today, we're going to talk about her struggles with imposter syndrome. Rachelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's been such a long time. I think it's actually been maybe like 3, 4 years since I've seen you in person.
Yeah, I think so, because
Um,
I think the last time maybe was not long after I graduated from Galvanize, and that was like January 2017.
yes. But even then, I think did you go directly back to Australia afterwards? Was that the
Oh, I only went back for a couple of weeks. So Gina, who was, a career advisor, was telling us to make sure after we graduated, don't do any travel. So I did exactly the opposite and left the day after we graduated. I came back to Australia for 2 weeks, but that was just because I figured everyone else in the class was from the US. If they wanted to go see family, like it was, at worst across the other side of the country. Whereas for me, if I got a job, I'm like, well, it's a little bit harder to just like take a couple of weeks off and go see family back in Sydney.
wow,
So
wow. I
off.
mean, but you got to do what you got to do, right? And
Yeah.
and I presume a lot of life has happened since then. But I actually wanted to talk a lot about your journey before you and I met, and I actually did not know this. I'm glad I did a little bit of research. That you, before this entire journey with you as a developer, you were a teacher. So,
Mhm.
what were you teaching? Who were you teaching? And what was it about that experience or something else that made you want to switch into something new?
Yeah, so you're right. I was so what we call here primary school teacher, what is in the US known as an elementary school teacher, and I did that for about 10 years. I was teaching over the 10 years. I taught all grades from K to 6, and the reason I ended up changing was I think I knew all along that it wasn't something that I wanted to do forever. I got into teaching because when I was in high school, having to make that really important decision of what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, I didn't really know what to do. And my career advisor suggested I try teaching. He didn't really suggest anything else. So I think the suggestion was largely because I was female and because, that's what females do, they teach. But I did it and I was good at it and I really enjoyed it. But in the long run, it wasn't challenging in the way that I needed it to be challenging.
Mhm.
Teaching's a really, really hard job. Don't get me wrong. I really, really can't stand people who are like, "Oh, why did you go to university to do teaching? Like I could just walk into a classroom and teach kids." I had quite a few people say that to me. I think these are the same people who say, "Oh yeah, like I think I'm going to have kids and I'm just going to work from home with kids, or I'll study from home with kids." They just don't understand.
Mhm, mhm.
So teaching's a really, really challenging job, but it wasn't challenging the way that I wanted it to be.
Mhm.
I was getting to the point where I just found it was becoming kind of rote and repetitive, and I was just doing the same thing every day. And
Right.
I've always been someone who's loved learning, and the opportunities to keep learning new things weren't really there.
Gotcha. And that makes total sense. And, and it's unfortunate. It sounds like you've had a lot of people who were like one way or another dismissive of whatever your thinking was. It's like, you might as well teach because of this reason. Or, why would you even go through all that effort, just to become a teacher? I find all those things very offensive. I find,
Oh yeah, no, no, don't worry.
Right. I mean, teaching is one of the most valuable and hardest jobs out there. And I think, especially during this crisis that we're in, people have learned to really value what teachers bring and have brought for years in terms of the kinds of comforts and support for society. So,
Yeah, I
um,
have to say, I definitely feel for all the teachers right now having to do what they're doing with teaching from home or doing what I've heard is the worst cases where they're both teaching in the classroom part time and then teaching at home part time as well, and
oh, wow.
yeah, just
Oh
sounds
wow,
incredibly
they should be
stressful.
heavily subsidized for that.
Yeah.
So, I want to get into, were interested in coding. And of course, I knew you mostly during your experiences learning coding in a very intense environment. But today you wanted to talk a lot about your struggles with imposter syndrome. And just earlier, you said that you wanted a new kind of a challenge. But can you reconcile for me how that new kind of challenge came with this condition of disbelief towards yourself while you're going through it?
Yeah, um, I think because going through school and then as a teacher, it wasn't something that I never experienced. I was always pretty good at school. For the most part, found work pretty easy. Teaching, there was definitely challenges, but moving into programming, I think a couple of things came into play. One was that it was completely new for me, and I went to Galvanize, and as you touched on, it was a really stressful environment to be in.
Right.
And I
I mean,
remember
not. I don't because we've spoken to a lot of people over at Galvanize. Not because of any sort of negative thing. It's sort of the nature of being in a boot camp environment, right?
in a boot camp, yeah, not Galvanize itself.
Right.
It's just the very nature of boot camps.
Mhm.
Um, but I think when I started at Galvanize, I went from being, as I said, at school where I always felt pretty confident, teaching where I felt pretty confident, to all of a sudden just feeling like I was at the bottom. In my class, there were 15 of us, and there was a really broad range of abilities going in. So I kind of went from myself, where I'd had very little experience, sort of just some self teaching, and then I decided this was the thing I wanted to do, quit teaching, and went into the boot camp,
Mhm.
all the way through to people who had been, they'd been doing it for years, and there were a couple of people who had even done other courses. And so, like, there were people in the class who would sit there and everything just seemed so easy for them, and they'd often complain about the fact that the work was just too simple.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, there was me, who I just felt like I couldn't absorb most of the stuff that was being thrown at us, and just felt like there was too much. And
Mhm.
so I think it started from that. And then when I got my first job, I think it just got worse because, like, I moved into this industry in my 30s, and I've got people who are just coming out of college, right? So there's me at the beginning of my career, and then there's like 20-year-olds who are at the beginning of their career. And so, people look at me and I think they see my age and they're like, oh, she's probably like a senior engineer by now. And obviously that's not the case.
Mhm.
I was a junior. So I
Mhm.
think there was just like extra pressure there. And it's just,
Right.
there's a lot to learn, and it's hard.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, I wonder how a lot of it. I mean, just because, and I'm trying to weave through this question delicately. You've done so much so far. You've already had an established career, and a lot of the people that go into these programs are exactly as you described. They're very diverse. Some people are just straight out of school. Some people are even straight out of high school. So
Yeah.
you went from uh, being an established educator and someone who's basically been a veteran of sorts in your own right into a new environment. And from what you just described earlier, my question for you is, how did you, in a way, like, I'm going to re-ask it in a different way. um, how did you, like, attain the kind of humility perhaps that's necessary for you to start something new and challenging like coding?
Um, so I think if I'm understanding your question right, uh, it wasn't an easy thing for me to do. I just knew that I didn't want to do teaching, and I knew that when I discovered coding, like, this was the thing that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I don't think it was so much a choice of like trying to do that. It was just, I knew it was something that I had to do. But the switch was incredibly hard. It
Mhm.
was incredibly hard because, as you said, like, when I was teaching back here in Australia, like, I was team leader of kindergarten. I was being trained to be an assistant principal, and then it was like basically starting from the bottom all over again.
Mhm.
And that's definitely a hard thing. And I think it's part of the reason why going through Galvanize, going through the boot camp, I just berated myself and beat myself up so much, because it was just that feeling of like not knowing what to do and feeling completely lost just all the time.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then since Galvanize, like over the 4 years that I've been doing this now, just kind of going through the process of realizing that every time I have one of those experiences where I feel imposter syndrome really badly,
Mhm.
trying to just realize that it's never the way I see it. Like, what I'm seeing and what I'm telling myself is not what other people are seeing of
Mhm.
me. And I don't know if that answers your question, or if I just went off on some weird tangent, but
No, I mean, I actually think that answers it actually in a way, and I think that's such a revelatory thing to think about when it comes to imposter syndrome, and that's been the case because the one thing while I was working at Galvanize, and I saw things very much from a third party perspective for a lot of students. So many people developed imposter syndrome, and the real truth is exactly what you said. For every single person that has imposter syndrome, it is never the way other people see it. Sometimes it's almost the polar opposite. Some people are like, no, they're actually doing really well. I'm very surprised that you think you're struggling. Yeah. No, that's actually been my perspective. And
I think that might have been the case with me because like there were a couple of times where I think I came really, really close to dropping out. And the other reason I didn't was because like, what do I do now? I've just quit my teaching job. I don't want to go back to that. Like if I drop out of this, what do I do?
right.
But there were a couple of times where I came really close because I just felt like I was drowning in the amount of content that was being thrown at me.
Right.
Um, and then at the end, so you asked at the beginning, like, we talked about me going to Australia straight after I graduated. So part of me going was to visit family. The other part was because I knew that as soon as we graduated, the next thing we had to do was start looking for a job, and that terrified me.
Sure.
So I was like, I'm going to go. I'm going to have a couple of weeks away, and I'm not going to think about it. But I know that everyone else from my course was back in Seattle. A lot of them were still going into the Galvanize office, like actively looking for jobs. And anyway, it turned out for me that I did, while I thought I did terribly, it turns out that I did a good enough job that I didn't even have to apply for any jobs. Because what happened was, while I was in Sydney, a startup that was in the building at the time were looking to hire a couple of engineers. And so the CTO went around to people who had worked with our class and asked for recommendations. And the same couple of names kept coming up, and mine was one of them. And that was because the instructors had seen that I was doing well. And so my name was passed on. And so I actually got an email from the CTO while I was in Sydney saying he wanted to interview me. So when I came back, he interviewed me and I got the job.
Wow. That's incredible. That's
So
that's yeah. Wow.
yeah, that was the first like real flip side of I'd been going through this experience of 6 months just feeling like a complete idiot, and then getting to the other and being like, oh, that wasn't the case.
That's amazing. Congratulations to that. And I have really just one question left for you. And we've kind of touched it a little bit already, but and you've also even expressed that maybe these are things that you're still going through as an ongoing developer. What are some of your suggestions or some of the things that you've done to manage this syndrome? And what would you recommend for others who are having the same kind of self-doubt?
I think so. Over the years, it's definitely it's popped up less and less. I think as you get more experience and you become more confident, it starts to become less of an issue. But it's definitely still there. So most recently was I was looking for work here in Sydney, and I ended up getting a job with Atlassian, but I was so close to not even applying for it because I know that their interview process is quite hard, and I was trying to convince myself there was no way I'd get through it. Even when I booked in the interviews, I was like, yep, you're not going to get through the first couple of interviews. They're going to be really challenging. But just I sort of had that internal conversation with myself where I I now recognize what's going on, like, and just so I guess my advice would be try and realize that this is just self-talk. What other people see of you, as I mentioned before, is probably not what you're seeing. And if there's something that you want to do, don't convince yourself not to go for it. If there's something you really want, just to go for it. Because worst case scenario, you apply for a job that you want to do and you don't get it. You apply to speak at a conference and you don't get selected, right? And the worst case scenario is you don't get that. But if you don't push yourself to at least try, you could really miss out on it. Like, I ended up getting a job at a company that I'm really, really excited to work for now. Last year I applied to speak at Cascadia JS, and I was one of the people that got selected. And I almost didn't apply for that, largely because the app that I was building, that I was going to talk about, I hadn't really started building it yet. But I took the approach of what would a guy do in this situation, and they would just apply. So that's what I did, and then I got accepted, and then I had to work really, really hard to actually get the app to a point where I could use it in my presentation.
Wow.
Yeah, so I
What
think
a
my advice is just to just go for it, and
wow.
don't let those voices convince you to give up.
I mean, and I feel like you've almost opened another can of worms with that little like, what would a guy do in this situation? And I don't even want to, because now I'm thinking more along the lines, what would Rachelle do in this situation? It sounds like just go for it, and I feel like that's a more appropriate philosophy for me. But Rachelle, this has been awesome, and I love just reconnecting. I'm just so impressed by you, honestly, and I want to give you an opportunity for a shameless plug for you to talk about whatever you like, whether it's something you're doing at work or some project you're working on or some cause you're passionate about within the tech world. The floor is yours.
Good question. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any shameless plugs right now.
Okay, we'll just leave it at that then. All right, Rachelle Rathbone, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Really appreciate it, and we want to thank everybody for listening and watching our podcast as well. You can check out more of our content on YouTube or also on our Podbean account and on pretty much every major podcasting platform. Of course, if you want to learn more about us, you can check us out with Educative at educative.io. So my name is Lee. On behalf of Educative, want to thank everybody for listening and happy learning. Bye-bye now. Hope you enjoyed that. This episode is available on YouTube and also on many podcast platforms. If you'd like to be part of Educative Sessions, the form is open now to apply. You can also email me at lee@educative.io. Lastly, don't forget to like and comment this video and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more content. Thank you so much for watching and happy learning.